Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to FBC Radio Live. It's Monday, January 15th, and we're two-thirds of the way through Wildcard Weekend. We got two games tonight now, thanks to the postponement, cancellation, whatever. Well, not cancellation, postponement of the Bills Steelers game. So we'll get that today, hopefully, in snowy Buffalo. But, John, it's been about a week since we've been on the air, and, well, quite a bit of things have happened, transpired, gone down, however you want to call it. The Patriots have a new head coach. I mean, come on. That's pretty big news, huh? After 24 years. I was 14 when he got hired. So, yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's Patriots fans, maybe late 20s, early 30s, that have known only one coach, and that being Bill Belichick for 24 years. And I anticipated the move. Again, last week was just crazy because you had Mike Vrabel dismissed in Tennessee, and you had Pete Carroll. You know, it was framed as a mutual agreement when it clearly isn't, because I think Pete Carroll wants to coach again. Same thing with the Patriots. Obviously, Belichick, I think, wants to continue coaching. And then Nick Saban retired. So it was just like one after another. After another. It was like, whoa, these are big names. And now trying to fill these spots that are available, you've got some great coaching talent out there, right? You've got Belichick, you've got Vrabel, you've got Pete Carroll. I mean, these are all A-list coaches. Saban, I'm not sure what could happen. I still think with Saban that, you know, if David Tepper from Carolina shows up with a 5-year, $150 million deal, he might be interested in that. But yeah, as far as Belichick, I don't think it was a surprise that this happened. Kraft was pretty much was sold on Gerard Mayo. And Ian, I think the reason he went right to Mayo, first of all, was in his contract, although he could have bought that out at some point. But I think at his age, 82 years old, he just wanted to move on quickly. He didn't want this long, drawn-out interview process. He felt he had the right guy in the building already. So that's the way he runs a lot of his businesses. You can agree or disagree if that's the best method. But I think Gerard Mayo will do a good job. I mean, he's a bright guy, commands the room, players respect him. Now, a key, obviously, is getting talent on the team, because you can have the greatest coach ever and, you know, make the case that the Patriots had the greatest coach ever, and they won 4 games this year because of lack of talent. So, got to obviously add talent to the roster and build up that coaching staff.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm indifferent, and I'm not saying that in a negative way on Gerard Mayo, because again, I was obviously in the camp of, you know, I thought they should have kept Bill Belichick, and it was even to me, it was even odder that they would get rid of Belichick and essentially make again, not in a negative way, a lateral move. And by that, I mean, same idea. You know, Mayo's only played and coached under Bill Belichick. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of the same, concepts and philosophies when it comes to approaching. You know, maybe there's a little bit fresher take, but, you know, I'm also looking at it and saying, yes, obviously this team struggled this season, but I think the lack of talent isn't as bad. It's not great, but it's not as bad as I think people have made it out to be. It's very heavily weighted on the offensive side of the ball, primarily the quarterback position. And I think a change at quarterback will just that alone would drastically change the outlook of what this team does. But I think there's a path to, you know, not reshaping the offense, but adding to it, because I think they do have some nice pieces. Like I think Kendrick Bourne, when he's healthy, if he's a number 2 guy or 3 guy or whatever you want to call it, I think that's a nice thing to have on top of guys like Pop Douglas and, you know, a healthy Ramondre Stevenson. And, you know, I liked what Ezekiel Elliott brought to this team. And you called it before the season, the offensive line in all these divisions, or all these teams in this division, were awful. And that played out for the Patriots. You know, I think a few new bodies in that mix obviously drastically improves it, just based on what they did this year. So, And look, to me, the defense is fine. You know, outside of the normal cycling of players that happens year to year, I think the defense is in pretty good shape, especially when you consider who they're getting back. You know, who they're getting back from injury, and Matthew Judon and Christian Gonzalez. So to me, I felt that sticking with Bill Belichick was probably the better move. If they were to move on, I thought maybe a drastic change in outlook or philosophy was going to be the route, i.e., were they going to try to swing for Jim Harbaugh and bring in that guy who was just in the college ranks and can shape a young quarterback and all that stuff and go more offensive minded? But to me, it was just odd that they decided to pretty much do the same thing and get rid of a coach who I think, despite what Mayo could do, I still think Bill Belichick's a better coach. And I think that's you're hurting yourself in that department in a season that I think you really are going to need some really good coaching.
This is the way Robert Kraft runs his other businesses, the paper and box company. You can't run an NFL franchise like you run the paper and box company. I'm sorry, it's a totally different animal. And I've said this a million times. I think if Robert Kraft owned a supermarket, Josh McDaniels would be the front end manager. Bill O'Brien would be the deli manager. Matt Patricia would run the bakery. And then apparently Gerard Mayo would be the store manager. Like you got to kind of branch out a little bit. He's comfortable being comfortable. So he brings back Gerard Mayo. He knew Bill Belichick pretty well when he hired him back in 2000. The only time they went kind of outside the quote unquote family was for Pete Carroll. And they went 27-21 in 3 years, but he also took over a Super Bowl team that got worse every year under Pete Carroll. So, I would have liked to have branched out into an offensive coach. My plan was Gerard Mayo as president of football operations, Adam Peters as general manager, who's since been hired by Washington for that role, and Jed Fish as head coach. And Jed Fish just went from the University of Arizona to the University of Washington. So, there's even movement going on in college football. So that's what I would have done. I like the offensive coaches. I mean, look at what Green Bay's done, right? With Jordan Love, offensive-minded coach, and Matt LaFleur. Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, first-year offensive coordinator at Houston. Look what he's done. Now, again, Jordan Love and C.J. Stroud deserve a lot of that credit. They're darn good, those two young guys, right? But, but they were also coached along and helped along by good offensive minds. The Patriots don't have that. They don't. They're running the same system they've run for years, which, to me, one guy mastered. And unfortunately for the Patriots, he no longer is in the league.
Yeah, unfortunately for a lot of people, including myself.
Well, this weekend was kind of weird because you missed Brady and I missed Rodgers. It would have been fun to see those guys in there. But
if you were watching the Packers game, you didn't miss them too much.
Oh, man. That's a damaging weekend for Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, well, sure. Somehow I think this has turned into a damaging weekend for Tom Brady because the same rules don't apply for Rodgers. I mean, come on.
Well, the way you can paint this with Rodgers is, and again, this isn't really good for talk radio. You usually pick a side. Mm-hmm. It's damaging because the Packers are better this year than they were last year. Quarterback play was better this year for Green Bay than it was last year with Jordan Love. I'm the first guy to admit that, right? But you can also say, in this sense, and this is how it's going to be painted for Rodgeristas, which I'm kind of one, but I will criticize my guy, is that he was very helpful with Jordan Love in the 3 years together. Right. The reports are that he did embrace Jordan Love. He didn't give him the Heisman. He didn't, look at him as some sort of nuisance. He actually worked well with the young quarterback, kind of like he worked with Zach Wilson, but Zach Wilson is beyond repair at this point. I think that's a good thing that he did embrace the young guy, and apparently some of it rubbed off because Jordan Love looked incredible yesterday. He looked like as good a quarterback as we've seen in the league.
Well, and look, I mean, we talked about it last year with Rodgers. We thought he took a bit of a step back, in his ability. So it's not just because he, the injury. So there is potentially some of that. And look, I mean, Jordan Love's been in the league for a few years now. He, like you said, he's been learning. This isn't a guy that's deer in the headlights in the NFL. Like he was prepared to start. He went through some ups and downs, and for the last 5 or 6 weeks, he's been peaking. I think I don't know the numbers officially, but it was something like 21 or 22 touchdowns to 1 interception the last 6 weeks. It's again, I mean, that's you can't get much better than that. So, but going back to Belichick real quick, and look, I mean, depending on how you see or take into account some of these articles that are conveniently coming out like all at once, Belichick wanted to move on from Mac Jones. That wasn't a Bill Belichick decision to keep him. So there's some of these things that, again, if they're true, and I always say, and again, obviously this would favor my perspective, but I'm not going to sit there and I've criticized these people in the past for kind of loosely just kind of reporting things that aren't. So I'm not saying it's 100% fact, but if you consider some of that stuff, you might rethink the hiring. I think we're going to see it play out here with the Patriots and potentially wherever Belichick goes next, because I do think he's, if he wanted to move on from Mac Jones early, then guess what? He was right, and Robert Kraft was wrong. And some of these things that have come out have been kind of giving you a little bit different look that, well, maybe, yeah, that the personnel was bad, but maybe that wasn't a Bill Belichick problem necessarily when we all kind of assumed it was. Now, again, I mean, it doesn't mean he hasn't had his misses in the draft. That certainly happened. But, at the same time, I think that's been kind of a little bit disingenuous to argue, especially from the receiver front, because, again, how many times have they drafted receivers high? So there's going to be a lot of mediocre to misses or whatever in the middle rounds. And look, you can criticize them for never going for that bigger receiver earlier in the draft, and that's fine. But I think how many receivers have they drafted that have turned into a superstar? Well, not many, because they haven't really drafted for that, So again, I'm interested to see what's going to happen with this Patriots team, how they're going to approach and look, best case scenario, you look at what's happening with the Texans right now and you say, hey, D'Amico Ryans, Gerard Mayo, very, very similar players, very similar careers.
Oh, Lord.
I mean, it's strikingly similar, actually. Obviously, Gerard Mayo with the Super Bowls, but, the thing is like you hope that the Patriots take to it. And look, the players obviously respect him. I mean, I thought the players respected Belichick, so that's not an issue to me. I don't think that's gonna, the players' love for Gerard Mayo isn't going to make this team better, because I firmly believe that they did for the most part, except for Trent Brown, of course. They did love Bill Belichick. So yeah, and look, Braden brings up a great point, and how many times has Belichick been correct about moving on from players? Obviously, his biggest mistake, and I'm sure he would admit it, is thinking Tom Brady. And again, you can't really fault him about thinking a 40-year-old quarterback was not going to continue to play at such a high level. So it's tough, because yes, you can criticize him for that, no doubt about it. But at the same time, you kind of say, you know what? It's not like you were moving on from a 34-year-old, and obviously that would have been a huge mistake and far too early. You were trying to move on from a 40-year-old. So either way, he was
trying to move on from a 37-year-old too, though, at some point, right?
Well,
2014. I increasing the skid at that point.
No, I mean, he's just, but they constantly draft quarterbacks, and yes, I mean, when a 37-year-old quarterback, I think you draft, I mean, you always have to be prepared. I don't think Belichick saw that as, oh, we definitely are moving on from him. Obviously, especially once that run starting in 2014. I mean, Belichick's not gonna, maybe he's looking at 2013 and saying, well, maybe we have to start thinking about the future. But he's not going to stick to that if he starts seeing 2014 and 2015. You know what I'm saying? And that's why Jimmy Garoppolo got traded, and this whole idea that Brady forced him out. Well, yeah, he forced him out by the way he played. I mean, you know what I mean? And then, of course, Belichick anticipated, well, I mean, Tom Brady can't possibly continue to play this way into his 40s. Well, guess what? He did. And, that's a testament to Tom Brady. And you know what? If you want to knock Bill Belichick for that, go for it. But I guarantee you that a majority of people in his position, and I'm sure Brady would have probably understood himself that, hey, you're approaching like ancient age when it comes to football players and quarterbacks. I mean, no one plays beyond this point. And people are upset that the coach, who's been doing this his entire life, making sure that he's always prepared for the next step. And ironically, when Brady did leave and that whole fumble happened, they were not necessarily prepared. And that's his biggest issue. And that's his biggest mistake during this whole process. But I think that's based on everything else. I think, again, I think you got to stick with him, but obviously I was wrong, and the Patriots have a different idea in mind.
Well, yeah, and maybe the Dallas Cowboys will have a different
yeah,
idea in mind as well if we hear this morning or within the next few days that they're going to move on from Mike McCarthy. By the way, they won 36 games in the regular season in the last 3 years. The second best record in the NFL for the last 3 seasons, but then they get to the playoffs, and we saw what happened yesterday. They didn't even show up. Right?
No, that was just embarrassing. And
really
look, again, as good as Dak Prescott has played for the most part of this regular season, he was bad. Mm-hmm. He was bad. And there are plenty of appropriate questions that should be asked about what he is as a quarterback, because it's all well and good when you play 80% great in the regular season, but we criticize.
I've compared them to Kirk Cousins. They're both good in the regular season. They put up good numbers. It's tough to move on from them because they're at least I don't know, top 10, top 12. I mean, there's only so many of these guys on planet Earth that are better. You want to find one to be at the next level. But then when you get to the postseason, I mean, Kirk Cousins wasn't all that good in his postseason appearances, and neither was Dak Prescott. He's 2-5, Ian.
Yeah.
In 7 playoff games. That's horrible. He was. They weren't going to win yesterday because the defense was just as bad.
Nothing
up and down the field.
Nothing was good about it. This wasn't all Dak, not at all. I mean, this was just. Yeah, they were bad all around. I mean, there was there was that one play where Stephon Gilmore got just, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you say? I mean, the guy's great has been a great quarterback. That was just bad and kind of a, kind of a nice, kind of look at what that game was for the Cowboys, because it was just a failure from every angle you look at it. But the most concerning thing is your franchise quarterback. And look, we talked about this team like, well, the Cowboys haven't beaten any teams really with a winning record. So how good are they? Well, I think we saw how good they were. They played perhaps one of the, I'm certainly not the best team in the NFC because you have San Francisco, but you're not going to go too far down the list right now based on how Green Bay's played the last couple of months and say, well, what teams are better than them? Well, I don't know, John. What teams are better than them? Are the Lions necessarily better? Maybe.
The last time they played each other, they won in Detroit on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a solid. I mean, that was an impressive win.
That was kind of the start of their run here. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, you talk about the Lions and Packers, and there might be more pressure on the Lions based on just the history of these two franchises. So, and look, I mean, they didn't. I mean, it was a really good game last night, but it could have very easily ended the other way against the Rams. So yeah, if the Packers, based on how they played, absolutely they could be in that matchup. So
can they beat San Francisco? That's the big question. And that again, if Green Bay beats San Francisco, and I don't think
this would be juicy.
It would be juicy, and it would be damaging, really damaging to Aaron Rodgers' legacy. He's 0-4 in his career against San Francisco in the postseason, and this is after he was passed by San Francisco with the first overall pick in 2005. They took Alex Smith, and then Green Bay took Rodgers with the 24th pick. And remember, his first comment was, "I'm going to make them pay for not taking me." Well, he's 0-4 in the postseason against them. He really hasn't made them pay. And San Francisco hasn't won a Super Bowl since 1995. I get it, but you're 0-4 in the postseason against them, including 2 games at home at Lambeau. A warm weather team coming in snow and cold, and you can't beat them. And if Jordan Love goes out and goes to the Bay Area and beats the number 1 seed at San Francisco 49ers, oh my God, this almost feels a little bit like the University of Tennessee. Remember when Peyton Manning was there? 4 straight years, great team, 1 or 2 losses, always in the mix, couldn't beat Florida. The year after he leaves, Tennessee wins the national championship with T. Martin at quarterback. So, and I think Jordan Love's better than T. Martin. This weekend, to me, the 2 rising stars in the league, C.J. Stroud and Jordan Love. They look like studs.
Oh, they were fantastic.
Young. C.J. Stroud, Ian, we talk about pocket presence. That kid has that, and that's something you can't teach. He has it. I mean, he's got all the tools, and Jordan Love's not too far behind.
No, and look, I mean, obviously, there's if you can sit there and go this is making already it's kind of a knock to Aaron Rodgers, but we talked a little bit about it before we got on the air. I think there's a couple of factors. One, I think we both agree that we thought Aaron Rodgers took a step back a bit last year anyway. So Yeah, it's not really fair to compare a 40-year-old guy to a 26-year-old. And Braden brings up another great point. They have, just Love and Stroud had very similar numbers, across the board. And I mean, two of the best rookie or first time playoff debuts numbers you could get. So good for those two. But yeah, I mean, you could,
against good defenses too,
yeah.
Ian.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
Cleveland. All right, Cleveland. Here's the thing about Cleveland: great defense at home, bad defense on the road. I have no clue how that happens. This isn't baseball with the
Yeah.
Colorado Rockies having different splits from home and away. Cleveland's defense has been bad on the road all year, but still, that's one of the top defenses. C.J. Stroud just shredded them. I mean, it helped that Flacco threw a couple of pick sixes, and it helped that Dak threw a pick six. But yeah, Love and Stroud did damage against really good defenses. Very impressive.
Well, and that's the thing. Love and Stroud could have thrown pick sixes too, but they didn't. And
Yeah.
that's what's great about them. And you like I said, like I was saying, like you can sit there and say, hey, look, the Packers are better, and yeah, they are. But maybe Jordan Love's just a really good quarterback by himself, and this
Could
has
be.
nothing to do
Yep.
with Aaron Rodgers. And
No, and yep.
yeah, and look, I mean, oh, go ahead.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add is, and I've said this for a million years, Green Bay has 8 first-round picks on that defense. And they looked good yesterday. I mean, yeah, Dallas got the 32 points. There were 2 garbage time touchdowns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was 48-16, midway through the fourth quarter. Dak is famous for that too, like playing horrible and then
The stat
having
padding.
a fake somewhat come back. Yeah, 342 yards, and oh my God, he was great. Well, no, 210 of it came in the fourth quarter when he was down by 32 points. Brady does that, and then he comes back and wins the game.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a little different.
And quite often those comebacks are few and far between, and his percentage in succeeding in those are pretty high. So
it's crazy. Yeah. So, but that defense has 8 first-round picks. They should be. I mean, Jair Alexander, when his head's on straight, is a top cornerback. Rashawn Gary's a stud. Kenny Clark's tough in the middle. They got all sorts of talent there. Give them credit. They've rebuilt the offensive line because Bakhtiari is as close to retirement as you can be to retirement. And those young receivers, man, they've done a great job with that. And again, this is another knock against Aaron Rodgers. He didn't embrace these guys until it was too late back in 2022. And the look on Jordan Love's face after the game was infectious to me.
Mm-hmm.
He just looks so like a young kid who's put his time in and really just did his work, right? For 3 years sitting behind a quarterback, learning, and it was pretty cool to see. And again, that offense is pretty special because, Matt LaFleur is out of that McVay tree and those things work. And I almost get the feeling, and again, this is bashing Aaron Rodgers Day here, but and again, coming from me, that means something because I love the guy. But sometimes I think Aaron Rodgers is in the way. It's almost like, here's the offense. Just try to execute this thing. It's pretty good. Like Jordan Love, it seems to be like the guy who comes to the sideline and goes, yes, coach, absolutely, coach. Whereas Aaron Rodgers got this smug attitude of like, well, I'm smarter than you, so we're going to do things differently.
Well, and look, I mean, it makes sense because I think that's what's, I don't want to say normal. Maybe Aaron Rodgers takes it to a little bit bigger degree. But I think, older quarterbacks, they kind of get catered to. That's one of the things, again, that made Tom Brady great. Because he was, if you ask anyone that coached him, they would probably say he's the most coachable person they've ever met. Mm-hmm. And that's always been one of his, qualities and why he's been able to adapt and all that stuff. And probably one of Rodgers' shortcomings. And these things there's fine lines between, the difference between great quarterbacks. They're obviously both great, but when you're talking about levels of greatness, those margins become thinner and thinner, but their impact is bigger and bigger. You know what? Does that make sense?
Exactly. No, absolutely. Yep. Mile wide,
right?
1 inch deep, or vice versa. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So that's why people can't some people can't kind of sit there and fathom and understand why Tom Brady's so much better than Aaron Rodgers, because they'll sit there and say, "Oh no, look at the numbers, look at this, look at that." But it's those razor thin margins that Brady excels in, and those are the biggest differences, and why players come through. Because as we talk about all the time, as great as Aaron Rodgers is, there's something about the championship round where he doesn't turtle. Because he's had good moments, no doubt about it. I'm not saying otherwise. But he has had some very bad moments, and in a lot of cases, it's why they lost those, and he hasn't had those extra opportunities. So, and then you look at what's going on right now with these young players. I mean, Romeo Dobbs looks great. I mean, this offense looks awesome, and it looks like it flows and it's comfortable. And look, I mean, not intentionally, but Aaron Rodgers was a distraction the last couple of years because his future, whether it was retiring or without the Packers or with the Packers, was always kind of in the backdrop and always kind of in the environment, in the atmosphere. Whenever reporters or just anything was Green Bay Packers, it was Aaron Rodgers. So a lot of freedom, I think, not only from the players, but look, Matt LaFleur too. You know, he's shown. I think he's kind of proven his chops a little bit here too, because he is doing it without Aaron Rodgers. And again, that's not to say that Jordan Love isn't a great quarterback in and of itself, but he's showing he can adapt to different players and continue and keep this consistency with very little turbulence along the way. You know, so good for him.
I would say you can almost compare Aaron Rodgers to another A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, who to me is the second best player I've ever seen. But similar in terms of, certainly narcissistic, and look, a lot of great athletes are narcissistic, but it was always about them. And oftentimes it was just like their team just waited for them to do something spectacular. And rather than kind of being part of the team, fitting in with the team and playing their role. And A-Rod, the baseball A-Rod, did win a World Series in 2009, and he was sensational in the postseason. And finally, maybe he just got it at that point at, 35 years old. Okay, this is what I need to do to help us win. And Alex Rodriguez is an all-time great, and Aaron Rodgers is an all-time great, but never quite finished it off. And you also look at Aaron Rodgers with Peyton Manning. They were both like in such command of their offenses that sometimes it weighed them down. Like, from what I understand, both of those guys don't like pre-snap motion, right? Like, and to me, pre-snap motion is essential to running a good offense, right? I mean, and again, maybe we're not all at the genius levels of Aaron Rodgers and Peyton Manning that they don't need pre-snap movement to tell if it's man or zone or whatever. But, Brady likes pre-snap movement, worked well for him. Play action, all of that stuff. It's all part of the package. And again, sometimes those great quarterbacks they just dominate to the point where they really get away sometimes, as great as they are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. And it's almost, especially once you get to a point too, like we said with Rodgers, that we did feel that his abilities have noticeably declined a little bit, and which is fine. I mean, that's what happens. He's 40 years old. I mean, forget about Tom Brady. Don't compare. He's a anomaly at this point. There's no reason to believe that someone else is going to, maintain that consistency past his 40s at this point. We'll wait and see. But for now, let's just pretend like everything else is back to normal. So to see him play at a lower ability, that's normal. We talked about it a couple weeks ago or throughout the season that, well, I think personally that this would have been a disaster season for the Jets, regardless of if Aaron Rodgers went down or not, because we've seen how this offensive line is played, and we just seen kind of the dysfunction in this locker room, and kind of a knock on Robert Saleh and how he commands the locker room. So it'll be interesting to see how Aaron Rodgers comes back, and look, I mean, God forbid if you're a pro Aaron Rodgers guy and the Packers go to the Super Bowl or win it. Oh boy, trust me, you're in for quite the time on social media if that's how you choose to spend it. So, but yeah, very, very impressive performance by both Love and Stroud this weekend. And hey, throw in Patrick Mahomes too. I thought he played a great game in the snow, in the cold weather, which Miami just didn't show up. And look, if there's any more evidence that Tua's just not the guy, I think this is it. It was, again, it just like before, it wasn't all his fault. Certainly wasn't, but his limitations as a quarterback, I think, kind of were put on full display in this game in particular. And look, if you're Miami, you're kind of up against it now, because this window wasn't a huge window. You gave up a lot to get Tyreek Hill. You gave up a lot to get Bradley Chubb, who, let's not forget, he tore his ACL in the last week of the season. So Is he going to play at all next season? And if he does, you know, it's likely not going to be till closer to the playoffs. So where does this team go? I don't know. You know, do they go after Kirk Cousins? You know, he's a free agent. Do they entice him? Do they try to get something for Tua? I don't think they do anything new if they don't change their quarterback. So,
well, you have to make that decision. You're going to pay Tua, because that's the next question.
Oh no, no, why?
No, yeah, you're going to give him a 5-year, $225 million.
Oh God, no.
$250 million. No, he's a quarterback who needs everything around him perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like he needs both of those receivers.
And he's had a lot. He's had a lot of things good around him this season. And look, I mean, he had a nice regular season. I'm not trying to knock him that, but you know, again, we're going back to these razor thin margins. You know, these things that great quarterbacks do that you know on paper may not look too dissimilar. I mean, you know, the funny thing was looking at Patrick Mahomes' numbers and Tua's numbers, and everyone saying, "Look, look how great Tua's doing." Well, no, I mean, their numbers are identical almost, but you guys aren't reading into it, and numbers don't tell you the story. You know what I mean? And this is a great example of it, because obviously the players around Tua were far better than what Patrick Mahomes had. And look, I obviously think that Chiefs fans take it a little bit too far when it comes to not having any help, because I thought it was interesting that a graphic popped up that said they had the third most drops in the league this season. And again, if you listen to them and some of the commentators, you would think, you know, they set the record NFL all time, you know, in drops and all that stuff. But when it comes to comparing these two quarterbacks in raw numbers, I mean, clearly, if you're not paying attention and not watching, you're going to sit there and say, "Oh, Tua had just as good a season." No. We saw Tua. We saw that when the pressure and the moments were the biggest, he's just not going to come through. And Patrick Mahomes does, for the most part. Again, you know, you're knocking Aaron Rodgers, and I'm complimenting Patrick Mahomes. How about that, John? That's quite a
bizarre world.
It is. It really is the bizarre world. We're gonna be eating at Reggie's later. So, but yeah, it's again this game I think was quite evident. Yeah, and again, I think that kind of shows to Braden's comment. He's like, how you know, I can't believe how often they ran that swing or screen pass. Well, because the one good thing Mike McDaniel did yesterday was realize that Tua just can't do it. So guess what? That's what they're going to do. They're just going to go for those screen and those quick passes. Because there's no way that he was going to be able to make those plays down the field when they really needed it. So yeah, Miami's kind of in a tough spot. I think they definitely need to go out and get a new quarterback and you know, just move on from Tua.
How does this sound? Like Miami has a tendency of swinging big. I mean, they gave up the draft capital against Tyreek Hill. You know, it's a star town, right? Like, you know,
three first-round picks for Mac Jones. I'll take it.
Yes, there you go. I think that would work out perfect.
We'll throw in Bailey Zappi too.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to see those two guys.
It'd be funny. You could do like, you remember the old, you know, Smash Demolition team, you know, from WWF. Like, you know, they all look the same. So like, one would like hide under the ring, and when one got like beat up, the other one would replace them, and everyone would act like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize it." That's what you can do with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. So,
like the Morris twins in the NBA.
Yeah, exactly.
They share a bank account. So how can we possibly differentiate between these guys? Same exact. But would they make a big swing? And look, Chicago has the first overall pick. It's still not clear if they're going to move on from Justin Fields, or if they're going to, you know, stay with Justin Fields, which would lead you to believe they'll trade the first pick overall in the draft. Does Miami try to put something together to jump up, get the first overall pick, and take Caleb Williams and go there and see if that's what they need to do? That's swinging big.
I mean, do they have
what Caleb Williams is going to be? I mean, but he could also be spectacular. So, yeah, they have their own first-round pick. What other draft capital they have? And, again, it's a later first-round pick because they made the postseason. You know, I don't know. I'm just thinking that if they want to really – they obviously have woken up today and said, we can only go so far with this guy quarterback. It's just – especially if you're not playing at home. If you're going to play in, you know, -4-degree weather, or you're going to have to win a big game against Buffalo at some point in the middle of a snowstorm, he's not capable of dealing with that. Look, last year they were competitive in that wild card game in Buffalo during, you know, cold, snowy weather. I mean, so they've actually regressed in one year because they weren't even in that game Saturday night against Kansas City. That looked like one of the Patriots playoff wins, like, wild card divisional round wins back in like 05 or something,
right?
06, where they just looked at it and go, well, this team's just better, and this team just is better coached and has the better quarterback, so of course they're going to win.
And look, I mean, Kansas City wasn't necessarily spectacular either, especially when you consider, Miami was playing like, that commercial with, they show like Dan Marino and Randy Moss walking off and then, with their equipment on and stuff like that. It's like 50-year-olds. Actually, the funny thing is Randy Moss and Brady are like the same age. So
they are, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of always found that funny. But that's kind of what the linebacking group was for this Miami team. I mean, you had Melvin Ingram in there. You had Justin Houston. I mean, it's like these guys, some of them literally just got picked up off the street. So Miami, to their credit, was missing quite a bit. And I think that was certainly a big factor in how this game was played. But again, when it's all said and done, it comes back to the quarterback, and these things happen, and you expect elite quarterbacks to elevate your team, and that's what elite quarterbacks do, and Tua did not do that. So, so there's that. So, all right, before we go, we got 2 games today. Obviously, Buffalo with the snowstorm and everything. The game getting moved to this afternoon, which is kind of cool. I kind of like the doubleheader on Monday now. So, I like Buffalo still in this, obviously with the snow. It's going to be a little bit messy, and I think with TJ Watt out, I think that's. I mean, if the Steelers had any shot, it would have been a dominating defensive performance. I don't think that's going to happen today, so I do like the Bills.
Pittsburgh's only chance, right, is creating 2 or 3 turnovers, which can happen with Josh Allen.
Oh, sure,
but they're going to need one of those to be a score too. Like, they're going to need a strip sack, fumble return for a touchdown or a pick six. And even then they may not score enough to win. Yeah, I like Buffalo in this game. And that would set up Buffalo, Kansas City next week, which would be certainly interesting. And then you got the night game with Philadelphia, which has lost 5 out of 6 down the stretch.
Yeah.
And horrible football.
And look, depending on what kind of team or what kind of game you get from Baker Mayfield, I mean, the Bucs could really kind of win this game, and it wouldn't honestly surprise me, basically just because Philly, it just hasn't played good football in almost 2 months or over 2 months, really. But at the same time, the Buccaneers are capable of only putting up like 9 points, so it could, Philly, the Eagles could try to lose this game, but the Bucs are a little bit better at losing games like that. So there's certainly potential that the Eagles could still win this game and still not look great. But my personal investment in this, John, is unfortunately the parlay that I picked for all 6 games was ended after the first game. So that was not an option the rest of the way. But I did choose Matt Stafford as my leader this weekend in passing yards. And so far, I'm feeling pretty good going into tonight to end it out. So I do not see any of these quarterbacks approaching a high 300s passing yards. I mean, maybe if the weather was okay in Buffalo, Josh Allen could do something, but I think you're going to see a pretty big game on the ground for Josh Allen. And I don't care what the conditions are. I don't care if they're throwing a Nerf ball. I don't see Jalen Hurts and Baker Mayfield throwing for high 300s. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. Hopefully I'll be cashing in a nice little ticket there. So
nice.
Yeah. So gamble responsibly, folks. Gamble responsibly. So anyways, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back. We're back rocking and rolling. It's a nice full week here at FPC Radio. And it's going to be fun. So enjoy the games today. If you're up in that blizzard-ridden Western New York area, stay safe. If not, hey, do what you got to do. Run outside with your shirt off. I don't care. Just don't drive in the snow. Just try to avoid it. It's a mess. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.